Silence has a strange way of shaping a child. It doesn't arrive like a storm, not loud, not violent. It settles quietly, like morning fog crawling across an open field, soft at first, then thicker, heavier, until it wraps itself around your lungs and teaches you to breathe quietly, move quietly, exist quietly. Growing up, that silence became my shadow. It stayed with me at the dinner table, in school, in every room of our home, reminding me that being unnoticed was safer than being seen. My sister, on the other hand, walked through life surrounded by applause. She seemed to float light, bright, radiant. My parents orbited her like planets around the sun. Her smiles were celebrated, her words carried weight, and her smallest triumphs were treated like national victories. I watched from behind an invisible wall, always present but never acknowledged. Her success was the soundtrack of our home. Mine, if it made a sound at all, vanished before anyone bothered to hear it. I learned to swallow disappointment the way other children swallowed laughter. I learned to smile through invisibility, to stand on the sidelines while pretending I didn't want to be part of the picture. I folded longing into small, neat shapes and tucked them away inside my ribs. But even the quietest heart has a breaking point. Mine arrived with the sharp clarity of a single terrifying moment, the night I realized I wasn't just overlooked. I was expendable. Something inside me didn't break with noise. It broke with silence, cold, clean, final. A part of me splintered, not with rage, but with a chilling calmness I had never felt before. That calmness terrified me more than anger ever could. That night, I reached for a pen. And for the first time in my life, I let myself speak. I wrote with hands that trembled from years of swallowed pain. I wrote truths I had buried so deeply I had almost convinced myself they didn't exist. Line after line, I let the ink bleed out everything I had carried: neglect, loneliness, questions I was too afraid to ask, wounds my parents never bothered to see. When the letter was finished, I folded it with the kind of reverence people reserve for confessions. Then I placed it where it could not be ignored. When my sister found it, her scream ripped through the house like a storm tearing open the sky. I was standing in the doorway when it happened. The sound shook something loose inside me. And in that instant, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I've always wondered whether children can sense when something is wrong long before they understand it. Maybe that's why I learned to fade, to shrink myself until I barely occupied space. Maybe that's why silence clung to me so easily. In our home, love wasn't a right. It was a privilege. And my sister claimed it so effortlessly that I often wondered if it naturally belonged to her and I was intruding by wanting it too. At dinner, I sat with my hands folded neatly in my lap, waiting, always waiting for someone to ask about my day. They never did. My sister talked, and the world listened. My parents leaned in, eyes glowing with pride. I stared at my plate, cutting food into small pieces I rarely tasted. Her certificates were framed on the walls like a timeline of her greatness. Mine were stacked inside drawers, edges bending from being forgotten. Her birthdays were events, complete with balloons, guests, and expensive cakes. Mine were hurried acknowledgments, squeezed between chores or errands. Still, I tried to understand. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe I wasn't what they wanted. That thought carved a quiet ache into my bones, one I lived with so long it became familiar. And yet, beneath all that ache, a small spark glowed. A longing for truth. For recognition. For the reason why their love never seemed to reach me. One night, the reason found me. I was walking past the hallway when I heard their voices, my parents and my sister. They spoke casually, almost lightheartedly, unaware of how their words sliced through the quiet like knives. They weren't arguing. They weren't emotional. They were simply talking about me. A burden, they said. A mistake they tolerated out of obligation. A shadow that took up space they wished they didn't have to share. My sister laughed. She agreed. She added to it. My breath caught in my throat. The air around me froze. Every moment of neglect, every cold glance, every forgotten birthday suddenly rearranged itself in my mind like shattered glass, finding its original shape. I pressed my hand against the wall, feeling it tremble beneath my palm. In that single moment, something inside me shifted, finally rejecting the prison of silence I had lived in for years. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I simply turned and walked back to my room, my entire world rearranging itself with every step. I knew then that the truth I had overheard would push me toward a decision I could never take back. The house felt colder that night. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath, waiting for what would come next. I closed my door softly, not wanting the sound to alert anyone. I leaned against it, letting the words I heard sink into the deepest part of me. They felt heavy, poisonous, real. I moved slowly through my room, touching the edges of old memories, moments that suddenly felt like evidence. A birthday card I had made for my mother when I was 7, still tucked in a drawer because she forgot to open it. A medal I had won but never showed anyone because I knew it wouldn't matter. A report card filled with good grades no one asked about. Moments I had tried to turn into pride, now hardened into reminders of neglect. I sat on my bed, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of the truth settle into my chest. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't too sensitive. I wasn't imagining things. They had chosen her. Always her. And they had chosen her at my expense. I didn't cry. Not this time. Something inside me had gone quiet, not the old silence, not the one that suffocated me. A new silence. Sharp. Clean. Resolute. I sat at my desk and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. The pen felt unfamiliar in my hand, like a tool I wasn't meant to use. But once the tip touched the page, the words poured out of me. They came slowly at first, then faster, as if they had been waiting all my life for a doorway to escape through. I didn't write for revenge. I wrote for freedom. I wrote because a heart can only carry so much before it collapses under the weight. I wrote because I deserved to hear my own truth, even if they never had. I wrote until my hand ached and the ink smudged beneath my fingers. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully, almost tenderly. I knew exactly who needed to read it first. Dawn arrived quietly, but inside me, everything felt unsettled, alive, trembling, waiting. I slipped into my sister's room before she woke. Her vanity gleamed with bottles of perfume, jewelry, makeup, her small universe of things she adored. I placed the letter right at the center, positioned so she couldn't miss it. Then I left. And I waited. The house was eerily still that morning. Even the usual clatter of breakfast seemed muted, as if the world itself sensed that something was brewing beneath the surface. Minutes passed painfully slowly. Then came the gasp. A sharp, cutting sound that sliced through the quiet. Paper rustled violently. And then her scream. It wasn't a simple scream. It was the sound of a truth hitting her so hard it cracked something inside her. A sound filled with shock, fear, guilt, emotions she wasn't used to confronting. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. My parents burst into her room, their voices frantic. I followed slowly, drawn by the unfolding storm. She sat on the floor, knees pulled in, clutching the letter as though it were burning her hands. "What happened?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. My sister didn't speak. She didn't look at them. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide. Wet. Terrified. It wasn't fear of me. It was fear of the truth I had finally spoken. "Tell us," my father demanded. She opened her mouth, her voice cracking. And with a trembling whisper, she said 4 words that shattered everything. It was all me. The room froze. My parents stared at her, stunned. She trembled, clutching the letter. And then the confession spilled out, ugly, raw, unstoppable. She admitted everything. The lies she told about me. The stories she fabricated to make them see me as a problem. The manipulation she used to keep their attention focused solely on her. The moments she twisted the truth just enough to turn their affection away from me. Years of cruelty wrapped in a sweet smile. My parents' faces drained of color. They looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Then they turned to me, eyes wide, voices trembling, searching for excuses. Apologies. Explanations. I felt none of the triumph they expected. No anger. No satisfaction. I felt released. For the first time in my life, the balance of power had shifted. They weren't the ones deciding who I was anymore. I was. But truth is not gentle. Truth demands consequences. My parents waited for me to speak, bracing themselves, their fear finally reflecting the fear I had lived with all my life. I inhaled slowly. Years of pain settled into one moment of clarity. What I said next would change everything. If this story touched a part of you that has ever felt unheard, unseen, or underestimated, let your voice be part of its echo. Like, share, and subscribe so more stories like this can reach the hearts that need them most.